very much. It's wonderful to be here for about 5 reasons. First of all, I did my master's here, so it's just lovely to come back. One of the special reasons I said yes is it was my birthday yesterday, and also my husband is also managing director of CUREE, Paul, and I fell in love during a master's here, so it's just wonderful. And as it was, so we decided to
how do we find the time?
have a very nostalgic, wonderful dinner, which we did do in Brighton last night. So it feels like coming home, and it's also lovely to be here because this is a subject, as you will hear, I'm very passionate about and still learning about. When I did my master's here, I don't know whether they still do, one of the books they got us to look at was called Human Inquiry. Has anyone looked at Rowan and Reason? It's a book of readings about research in sociology rather than just education. And the cover's all graffiti. And there's one bit of graffiti that says, "Was that research I saw you with last night?" And the response underneath it in handwritten is, "No, that was no research, that was my life." And that is what I think happens. We get this habit of seeing the world systematically through evidence and peeling the layers off the onion and finding something else shiny, exciting, thought-provoking and challenging by doing the work we do in relation to evidence. So I got the habit and I'm a complete junkie. So very pleased to be having the opportunity to share some things with you this morning. This is not showing up so terribly well. There's a picture here of a teacher working with some young students. I'm sorry, I only thought about doing this over breakfast this morning, so I photographed a tatty piece of paper I carry around in my handbag, and then Paul emailed it to me, and so that's why I said, teacher, small children, what my friends think I do. Picture of Einstein doing a sum, what my mum thinks I do. Teachers sitting around having a coffee, what society thinks I do. Is it Snape? Yeah. In Harry Potter, what kids think I do. What's the film? Yeah, what I do. And then teacher surrounded by a pile of books and marking. Well, what I really do. And what I want to do in this session is say that's not actually what it's like. And when we've got evidence about how teachers learn and what work-based, skilled, inquiry-rich professional learning looks like, we see that none of those things are quite true, those elements you're all about. What I'm going to try and do is start off with an analogy to help us think about this and the different worlds, research and evidence of continuing professional development and learning. And then I'm going to give you, I think, perhaps 2 examples rather than 3 of effective engagement in or with research. We'll just see how much time there is. And then we're going to break, and you're going to have a quick buzz, and then we'll get your ideas in so that the next bit of what I've got to say to you is informed by your thinking. What I want to do then is just lay out what's really surprising, which is just how consistent the evidence about what teacher learning looks like the world over, when it really makes a difference, not just to the teachers, but to their students and their pupils. That evidence is really consistent. I think quite hard about why that's not necessarily the experiences we're having access to. And then I want to share with you an example of a school that's trying to embed and systematise this for all staff, and like all schools, it's getting some things working wonderfully and some things it's struggling with. And then for you to have a quick buzz about that and some questions and a discussion, and if there's time, there's a lovely story to finish with, but we'll just see how, it might be better to use that time for discussion. We'll see whether the story goes. So that's what I'm going to try and do. If we think about it, lots of the disciplines of doing research are all those things about how we can make work valid and generalisable are really about taking real world phenomena and analysing all the complex things going on in them in a way that's generalisable. It's kind of a way of removing some of the clutter so you can think about things clearly and from a distance, which is why I've chosen a distant view of the planet to try and speak, for us, for me anyway, with some of the kind of things we do when we try to add research to our professional learning and our daily life. But what I think teachers learning from and with and through research looks and feels like, it's more like this. It's got that human element to it, hasn't it? Yes, we're trying to get a distance from the day-to-day work, supporting learning in classrooms and leading the learning of our colleagues. But it's a human thing. And the minute we hold something in human hands, there's bits of it we can't see anymore. And it feels to me that the evidence about teacher professional learning is A, does that job. So the international evidence is like this. It's very abstract. There are about, I think it's about 14 ingredients you have to have in place to really be sure that your professional learning experiences work for you in a way that enables you to bring them alive in your pupils' learning experiences in and out. But that would be abstract, and that's not really how it feels, and the world's messier than that. So that's why I've got those two images there. And then while we're on big round things, I thought the other thing that's quite important to notice is that we've got all this research-based knowledge of different kinds, busier sanguines in an egg timer, and then we've got all your practice. Oh, I've got to come back. And we've got practice-based knowledge, equally busy, being put into action second by second in the decisions we make in school. And for the knowledge to move between those two worlds, I think it's quite important to notice tiny ways through the egg timer. And the more we research something, the bigger and more complex we understand it to be. The more we immerse ourselves in organising our professional lives to service learning for pupils, the bigger it can be, and the harder it can be to get those two things all together. What I think the international evidence about professional learning does is help us understand what's going on here and how to make what's going on here and going on here connect. So that's the kind of mindset. So I'm going to start with some examples of different ends of the spectrum of what I think professional learning can look like and does look like, and then ask you, using your own knowledge and experience of what this is like in the real world, and these examples, to think and try and pull out some of the key characteristics. What is it that you think the research is likely to say makes the most difference? And you can cheat, because the slides that you've got in front of you, you can have half so much fun, and it will be much better because it won't have your expertise in it. So here's some piece of research done by Alf Coles, and what he was very worried about was algebra and what was happening in mathematics in year 7. He thought it was algebra that was making his pupils decide they weren't mathematicians and give up on maths and just go through the hoops and do the techniques without engaging their brain or their soul or their emotion or anything with it. And he was determined to try and change that. So he decided to work with the history department and his students to research what it was that algebraists, this I am told is the right word, mathematicians who are really good at algebra, what it is that algebraists have done in the world. What difference have they made? Who are these guys? And how do they go about their world and their work? And he did a research, and I'm going to tell you the things he did in a minute, but quite astonishingly, within 15 weeks, he got a whole mixed ability class succeeding at GCSE algebra. They were not just able to do the paper, they were starting to come to it end, they were starting to think for themselves about how to construct algebraic problems. They understood algebraic statements in lots of different contexts, and they could weigh up which strategies were likely to be useful. This was really deep transferable knowledge, and there's a red link to a summary of his research there. How did he do it? Well, first of all, he researched, I'm sorry, I've not got, there's a slide missing. When we put this up on the website, I'll add a slide to it. So one of the things they found was that algebraists were organised. They analysed the things they needed before they started solving the problem, and they made sure they got everything together. They always showed their thinking. They made their thinking public. That algebra in one way is about making their thinking public so someone else can spot it. They were particularly focused on spotting patterns and so on. And so they identified I'm not a mathematician, so I'm feeling quite proud that I remember these 3 core features of algebra. If there's anyone in the audience who thinks some more, that would be good. But he then decided his job was to get all of the class spotting and celebrating good algebraist behaviours. And so his job as a teacher was to design learning enable them to show off their good algebraic behaviours. And they noticed also that when algebra made a difference in the world, it was communities of mathematicians working together. And so they decided they were a community. They were going to become a community. They were a community of learners, and they were going to become a community of algebraists. And so they had to work together. So to make this real, he lined one wall of the classroom with brown paper and cut it up with ribbon into different areas. And the first thing he did was he said, nobody ever finishes their own problem. I'm just going to blow a whistle randomly, and at that time you will take up the problem you're working on, you pin it on the board, and you take down somebody else's, and he sprayed it with repositionable glue so that they could all take each other's work on and on. And they learned in seconds. They had to write their thinking down, because when they picked up somebody else's solution without any working, they could see there was stuff. Another area of the board was for questions people were starting to see in the mathematics of the Uzumoni, so the question area. There was another area for people who finished a problem and were looking for someone else's work, someone else to partner up with, so they could see whether their working approach could help someone else. And there was another area for patterns they were noticing. So this was a key part of how he went about it. And he was able to take photos every day of these working boards to see how they emerged over time. So that was part of his data as a researcher. And he was also finding it made the learning very visible. So he had to do a lot less teaching and could see where there was a need for intervention. But what he found was he very rarely needed to intervene, because the whole business of my problems and my struggles are a contribution to the community meant that the students were noticing how to help each other and started to notice how helping each other was cementing the mathematical communication for everyone. So that was a wonderful story, and he's carried on with this research. He fairly recently went to Bristol University, and he's now an IGT tutor, but also works still on this kind of research. Now, here's a different example. This is Cheryl Collis, who's a deputy head researcher, got the research habit, and she's in high free school meals primary school in the Black Country, and quite a high number of very vulnerable pupils, white working class estate, plus some EAL students, so quite a mixed community too. And they tried a lot of different interventions of work finding their work, and was looking for something more systematic. And she became part of some work we were doing on something called response to intervention in Year 6 as part of an Education Endowment Foundation trial. And she got incredibly impressive results, particularly for pupils for whom nothing else works. This was an intervention we carried out from summer half term to the end of Year 6. And the idea was how close to level 4 could you get students for really a long wait time. And 9 months progress, 5 weeks with this intervention. Absolutely something. And so she's now, as a sort of lead CPD leader and research and practice leader, designed RTR tools and protocols into Years 4 to 6. And response to intervention is now being trialled in Years 5, 7, and 9 nationally via the Teachers School Alliance Close the Gap, big randomised controls that we designed 7 randomised controlled like interventions. Is anybody involved in Close the Gap test and learn randomised control trials? No, okay. Well, I can talk about that in questions later. So basically, these are being led, these are trial interventions where the school is acting as a trial methods. So quite radical from that point of view. And the thing that's critical about RTI is it starts with close case analysis of in-depth literacy needs of the most vulnerable pupils, where you're both looking at how they're working and learning across the big building blocks of literacy, but also trying to understand what's similar and distinctive about the most vulnerable learners in a class. And then very specifically selecting research-based high-impact interventions for the forensic, very specific needs analysis that we've done. And at the same time, thinking really hard about the level of intensity of those interventions and making about when you can do it. You should be doing it whole class, when you should be doing it in small groups, and when you should be doing it one-to-one. And then it's an iterative process of collecting evidence with the pupils about how their learning is progressing and moving up and down that whole class, small group, one-to-one intervention with fast feedback loops to adjust the intensity. So all the time the teachers are inquiring into the learning of the most vulnerable learners. And also the whole thing is set in the context of a very strong image of success. So there's a very challenging homeschool holiday pack of activities that's rather beautiful actually, based on Michael Morfoggo's Kinsman's Kingdom, which is a very challenging piece of holiday type project work for the pupils. And it's about getting the school, the home and the pupils excited about doing this and ready to be able to do it over the summer holidays. And Cheryl actually got the secondary school to treat this as a really high status assessment activity. What have we learned from all of this at the beginning of the year? And just to give you a sense of it, you won't be able to read the detail of this, but this is, so the tools behind this are, we've organised the research. Here this is about comprehension and the peer-assisted learning strategies have high impact for most vulnerable pupils. They function for comprehension but also reading accuracy. They work well in whole class and small group. They don't self-evidently work so well one-to-one because it can be paired. And then there's a little description of an outline of the intervention, a weighting of the evidence for age relevance with a high, medium or low impact, and what kind of impacts a teacher can expect, so that the teachers have got a whole menu like that, so they can make strategic choices, and then they've got the detail in the RTI resources about the interventions they should choose. So what the teachers are doing in making strategic choices through close feedback loops, using evidence-based resources. Okay, so those are my two examples. So have a buzz and think about those two things and the research work, the research-based learning going on in your schools, and think about what's similar and different and what might be really key ingredients in all of that. So have a quick buzz with the people sitting near you, and I'll stop my phone.
All right.
Oh, the slides? No, I'll get one from the slides. Do you want one?
Yes, I came in during right, yes, that's really very
So what kind of ingredients did you see there, or do you know from your own experience that you thought were really powerful about how those teachers were learning and what was maybe fueling the success in those learning examples? Dull carpet.
I like very much the algebra, the way that, because I know from experience a lot of pupils, when they know they've got their maths lesson, that's a barrier straight away. Oh, I've got maths, we've got numbers, oh, I can't do it. But linking the history aspect of it, I thought that was a really nice way of easing in. So that, you know, I'd love to see it in practice, where I'm going to speak to the head of maths and say, okay, look, when you've got your next algebra lesson, don't teach them algebra, teach them the history of it. And see what they do. You know, I'd love to see what the kids think, but they're not doing maths today. No, you're learning history. You know, and see what happens there. I thought that was a nice thing.
Someone else?
There's just nodding, and it's about relevance. It's about relevance.
Yeah.
And I think in the maths example that's very clear, and in the literacy-based example, the home link is where the relevance is made clear to all your stakeholders, or however you want to, you know, make that group of people. It's not just one person involved. There are more. That's what they have in common. There's not just a teacher and a student. There are a variety of roles involved.
And the purpose of the learning matters to them. You know, it's how does algebra make us work in the world? How does literacy happen in my life outside school?
It's also they both have in common using each other as resources rather than the teacher. The teacher is providing the environment, whereas the children are providing the learning almost.
Yeah. And the kind of the collaboration is very strong. It's no accident that list of research-based interventions that teachers are making choices about starts with collaboration. Collaboration is built into nearly all of them. You're absolutely spot on. Any other things?
I think for me, it's this idea of own flexibility. So with the whole one, there's that focus on spotting behaviours, and the class kind of working together to spot certain behaviours and using workboards. But then with the second one, the vulnerable students, the teacher was able to vary that level of intensity, and I think that applies to both actually.
Absolutely, lovely thing to notice. So your name is
Katrina.
Katrina. Lovely thing Katrina's noticed there. So the teacher, in both cases, it was about the teachers having the learning set up, and things were in place to make it easy for them to exercise real in-depth professional judgments in response to the pupils' learning. Absolutely.
In both cases, I mean, obvious point that the teachers actually had to take quite a lot of time to investigate, because the depth of in both, in different ways, actually needed to take time to read through the maths one to then realise that he needed to show that happening by having it out there on the board and make those connections. But it's not an effort with the teachers.
Okay.
You don't see that in that.
So these are busy, they're complicated, in-depth, over time things that make these very big differences to people's learning. And there is a lot of work in this. And in both cases, what was interesting about the teachers' learning was there were things there that made their lives more efficient. Some of the hard work was taken out of the situation to enable them to focus on the really important judgments. You're absolutely right.
If we say for effective intervention, you need to know what the issue is, who it affects, what interventions work, hasn't worked. Both few examples you brought out. Research is embedded at that same introduction phase, or the conclusion summary phase. That's part of each stage of that process.
Nice observation, absolutely. So you've got research is there at the beginning, you know, in that menu. It's a bit like that globe I showed you. You know, this is hard-edged experimental design research findings, but then then embedded within the process is an iterative cycle
struck me was about metacognition, but not just from the teachers, but also from the way that they engage the pupils and made them think about their learning and the learning going through the process. And if you think about the EPI review on motivation, a lot of the things which were in that list, the children themselves, people there, for example, had said motivated them were also evident in that, but to actually metacognitively engage the pupils is the really powerful part of it.
Yeah. And was metacognition for the teachers?
Yeah,
too?
absolutely. That's what I mean. So
There was a
from them and
consistency.
from them.
Absolutely. So, if we then go to, here's the abstract world. This is, remember that globe at the beginning spinning on a rubber? These are the kind of things that go into that. This is just what goes into a systematic technical review of research. We were just talking about an EPI review, so I perhaps don't need to go through this in any detail.
Don't touch the board.
Do you hear that, Philippa? Don't touch the board.
So when we do systematic reviews, to try and get them to spin on that plane and be really reliable, we go through all these really systematic double-blind processes. I always think of it a bit like, it's called, at the heart of it is double-blind data extraction, and I always think that sounds like dentistry, and I tell you it feels like dentistry if you've never been part of an EPI review. But we have got a series of systematic technical reviews done in this country, done in America, done in New Zealand, and they come up with remarkably similar findings. So I won't go into that now, and you can find examples of them. But I was asked to do a paper. Vera's commission inquiry on research and teacher education, and they asked me to do a review and a paper about the contribution of research to teachers' professional learning. And what I'm about to take you through comes from that. This is a copy of the paper, and it's based on systematic technical reviews. And where the systematic technical reviews lack illustrative evidence, occasionally I've used a more contemporaneous individual study to illustrate a phenomenon that comes out, but otherwise all the evidence I'm talking about comes from systematic technical reviews. So what does it tell us? Well, first of all, one of the things that's only fairly recently become very clear is that when we got good evidence about impact of pupils, we've always got evidence about linking pupil learning and teacher learning. Not, as it's most configured in schools in this country at the moment, on the basis of pupil needs, but on the basis of teachers' aspirations for their pupils. Subtle but important difference. So a school will be organising professional learning and development opportunities based on an audit of pupil needs. That's a sensible thing to do. But when you turn that into a professional learning experience for teachers, it's really important to enable them to make some professional choices about which particular students they've got in mind or pupils they've got in mind to focus on, so they can do that in-depth job that Jo was just bringing out from those examples earlier. And when we focus on a few pupils so that our professional learning can be deep, all kinds of things flow from that, and we need to do that for pupils in relation to what aspirations. So if I learn really well about literacy, if I learn really well about how to bring algebra alive, what will my pupils' learning look like? It's a slightly different question from saying to a teacher, if you learn really well about what you're doing about algebra, which pupil needs will you have met? One's kind of motivating and inspiring, and the other feels professional and good and businesslike, but not somehow quite so connected to the person. So that's a very important part of research. We always get examples of in-depth specialist contribution. And what is it that specialists contribute to teachers' professional learning? First of all, they make sure the learning is sustained and structured. That was quite a lot of work I did in setting up the classroom like that, doing the research for the history department first. If you'd given up early and not done all the designing the tasks, things might have just sprung back to how they were before. Making choices from that long list of menu and keeping going around the literature cycle for Cheryl, Hollis and that college. This is quite a lot of work. Having specialists there to say, look, keep going, it's worth keeping going. I know it feels like a lot of work, but remember, this is how it can be. Modelling high leverage approaches that are different, so modelling it so teachers can see what it looks like. And supporting the research process, making it manageable, because the first thing that can happen is just drown too much evidence. So helping the teachers figure out which evidence to collect is really going to fuel their learning and practical success. I'd add to this that slightly less strong findings, knowing how to get out of the way. Good specialists know how to get out of the way, and sometimes specialist support might not be in person. It might be a study you've read. It might be a case study involving it might take lots of things, or it might be a combination of something you've read and someone else in your department or in your school who's going to be your learning buddy. Because although there's always specialists, there's also always sustained peer support, and there's more of it. There's only one study I've come across in all the hundreds we looked at where there was not teacher-to-teacher collaboration structured and built into the learning, and that was when the external specialist was instantly a full day a week for 2 years, and he became a co-deliverer. And the thing about peer support for inquiry-oriented professional learning is that if I risk looking vulnerable by doing something really silly and risky, and Katrina does too, then we start to not want to let each other down, and that keeps us going. I might have thought, well, I'm not going to try. I'm just going to have an easy algebra lesson and hand out some worksheets. But if I knew Katrina was trying it with her class, I wouldn't let her down. There's something about reciprocal vulnerability that changes how we behave as human beings, and it speeds up trust building. And we need that kind of trust around us to take these risks. Otherwise, we'll talk the talk. Teachers are very good at talking the talk and finding the ways round the big change. It's scary and it's hard. So peer support, massive. They also had a chance to learn about professional learning, to pick up your metacognition point from looking at both their own learning and people's learning. And actually, there's a skill in learning about observation, and the people who mostly get the chance to observe the magic that is teaching and learning, going right and going wrong in classrooms, are usually the people who need that opportunity. They're the senior leaders who've seen lots and lots of it, but the people who most need the opportunity to learn how to learn from looking at classrooms get least time to observe the craziness. There's always structured dialogue. Do that. Stay. The structured dialogue about evidence and tracking that. Professional learning conversations do not correlate with pupil success on their own. They really don't, unless the dialogue is focused on disturbing the status quo, trying some new things in learning, and talking about how pupils respond to them. Just having conversations about the status quo reinforces the status quo, doesn't change anything. So the learning stays shallow. In deep learning that really feeds into pupil success, you have to have the dialogue focused in that way. The goals can be very ambitious, and one of the big surprises from this evidence is that this works for natural enthusiasts, sure, but actually it works for conscripts too. You can see this kind of success for teachers who are given professional learning experiences of this kind, even if they've been told, you have to go and do, you're a physicist, but we need you to do maths, you've got to go on this program and learn how to do it. So long as the teachers have this kind of sustained inquiry based opportunity and peer support, and so long as they're able to make the choices around their aspirations for which group of pupils they start with and so on, you get this kind of success whether the teachers volunteer for it or not. We know too that modelling by leaders, there's a wonderful review by William Robinson, which if you don't know, you really should look at it, and there were web links at the end of the PowerPoint to take you to all the study. But the most effective thing that a school leader can do that correlates best with student success is to invest in a model work-based professional learning. So leaders need to be modelling this kind of learning. They need to share with their staff what they're doing with their learning. I want to give you a powerful example of that later. Providing the time you'd expect to see there, encouraging experimentation and analysis. Quite often there are studies where this isn't working, where you see leaders saying, oh, we're an inquiry-oriented school, and people go away and collect loads of data, but actually the in-depth analysis doesn't happen. All there is really is monitoring, tracking of targets. But the kind of debriefing, the metacognitive job on why did it work, why didn't it work, that's the thing that's very often missing. And then the other part that we see from these international studies is that when teachers and professional learning really works for them and their pupils, they are always developing theory and practice side by side. It's not practice first, theory after. It's not theory first, practice after. It's the two working and with each other on an individual basis, going all the way through. Anyone got any questions about those characteristics? Any surprises?
We've done lots of staff meetings now all about sharing, what works and so forth. And we've done it from the point of this has worked for me, but actually when we've shared it, we haven't given the evidence for that. It's all been anecdotal.
Yeah.
You could try this too, these are the examples. And I guess that's what was missing, and we've wondered why. We put so much effort into sharing, multiplying, and setting all sorts of things, and we see no real ripple effect. And I think probably that's right, because there's no proof that actually it works. So perhaps there's some around that it's worked to some extent.
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting observation, Joanne, because actually the evidence about sharing is that there are benefits in it, but do you know who gets them?
People share.
Yes. There's no benefit to the people being shared with. And the same was true of lead schools, the same is true in coaching. The people who are coaching and inquiry-based coaching and action research are two halves of the same coin, and the most effective forms of professional learning, such as in study of another. But they don't have the same kind of impact in both ways. So the people who are doing the coaching gain even more than the people they're supporting. And there's lots of reasons for that. There's a little leaflet. When we get to the goose bit, we might have to attend to that. But you're absolutely right. So it will have helped the people who did the sharing embed their learning. It would help them even more if instead of sharing what they did, they turned it into an inquiry for the person they're sharing with and asked the teachers they were sharing with to inquire into it and then come back with their results. It's adding that layer of debriefing and trying things out. It's a great start. It's instinctively a great start. It's just that it's only the start and so there's things to add.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What would the inquiry look like? The inquiry would look like you going away and commenting in your class.
Yeah.
The same set of students, the similar set of students, or
Well,
any set of students.
okay, well what this evidence would say would be, so Joanne tells me about
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Marking. So
Yeah.
we've had a massive push in our school on feedback, and Steve is the person that shared a way of marking with people that gets the kids engaged with the feedback. But it hasn't. It's not really gone very far, and one or two people taking it up, but it's not really had the impact that we thought it would have, because actually the presentation is very practical. It's got lots of examples.
Using your husband as a modern failure.
You
Did really well with that one.
are right, but now I suppose what you're saying is, if they ask some staff, can you now do it and find out whether it works with your kids, they've got more reason to do it than
Yeah. And what this evidence would say was like, don't do it for a whole class. Well, do it for the whole class, but make your inquiry focused on a particular group of learners. The rhino, really hearing name only, skilled disappearer learners would be a fabulous starting place. When teachers inquire into how their practice works for skilled disappearers, there's no blame in there, is there? I mean, these pupils are really good at disappearing, and they're like very quiet, not much trouble, but I'm really sure what's going on there. Great starting place. All start with the gifted and talented or struggling there, but get them to focus, do whatever you like with the whole class, but inquire into how it's working for a few pupils and collect their evidence, work with them to figure out whether it's working.
Or maybe you can't do it in your own class.
Yes, absolutely. Make the familiar strange
Can't find a rhino,
yeah.
can't find a rhino on somewhere else.
Yes.
And might actually do the research there.
Absolutely. Okay. So help us remove our assumptions.
Yeah.
So that we can see the learning fresh. Absolutely. Colleague here.
Sorry, Laurie Altendorf. I'm glad you flagged up that the evidence highlights the importance of leaders modelling support by, for example. I mean, research that I've been involved in has highlighted the importance of this, and you know, I'm interested in maths education, and if you don't, if classroom teachers who are taking perhaps a longer term approach to changing their practice, because these things don't change overnight, if they're not supported by senior managers who sometimes, I'm sorry to say, have pressures put upon them to achieve short-term goals, then there's this conflict. You know, the evidence is saying that classroom teachers need that support to have the time to plan and reflect and so on and so forth, and yet there's a conflict with the short-term goals of government which is voiced through senior managers in these short-term goals. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm going to give you an example.
Right.
Exactly that one. So that's the next. First of all, we tried to put that evidence together in an inquiry cycle, slightly different from the normal inquiry cycle, but I won't go into that now because I'm going to pick up Laurie's point. But basically we're saying, just do this job of focusing on a few pupils whose learning will look different, and you'll find that makes the teachers want to make the journey that you were talking about here. What knowledge and skills do we need, and where do we get them, is the question we then pose to shape the inquiry into professional learning, deepen professional knowledge and skill by reflection on wider evidence. Don't just rush to do the thing down the road. Think about all the possibilities and make a professional choice. If you've made a professional choice about which aspect of Steve's feedback experiences you're going to concentrate on, the more you've made a choice, the more you'll stay with it. And experiment with new approaches and collect evidence, keep at it, then review the evidence and go around the cycle. So that's the right cycle. And dashing through that, we'll come back to the time. What I'm really saying here is what source will do. All those things you've been learning about pupils learning, we need to apply to staff learning. And we're at the point in professional learning we were at with pupil learning 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were focused on the teaching too much and not enough on the learning. And we've learned to do better than that over the last 10 years, and to really focus on teaching and learning in relation to each other. But we're not doing that for teachers.
Doing something automatically, Philippa.
It wasn't on the auto thing on mine, but it's translated over to the computer. So we've done too much focusing on teaching teachers and not enough on wakening up their sense of an identity as professional learners. And there is a job to do for teachers in helping them develop metacognitive skills on their own learning, making them aware and making choices and feeling powerful about how they string together a bunch of CPD random activities quite often from a teacher's point of view, because there's so much one-size-fits-no-one CPD being offered, and personalise that into a professional learning journey where they're taking professional responsibility for it. And for schools, we do a lot of work with schools on sort of scale, and the leaflets at the back about all of this, including response to intervention. Scale, which is the collecting amplitude, splitting the reformation, we've got a bit of a thing about these. It helps schools think about how you make the day job a professional learning environment as well as a learning environment for students. What are the day-to-day activities going on in schools that you can wrap this evidence around to make every day feel like a rich professional learning experience? And it's a sign of a school that's got this right. It's a sign of the sort Joanne and Stephen just talking about. Schools where people's trying things out and isn't working are pooled for general knowledge is an even better sign of professional learning community than a school where all you ever see is signs of success. So being sure to share things not working as well as working is really powerful. Anyway, this is a link to a little leaflet called Source for the Goose. There's a recipe at the back. It does work really well with goose. Apple, coriander, ginger, and chili. It works really well with duck and not roast too. So what we're saying is professional learning feels like crossing a mountain stream in some rubber sandals and the water's really icy and coming fast, and you don't know what's coming, these are the lessons coming at you, and you're trying new things, and you're balancing, and you know if you fall off it's going to be cold and might even be dangerous. That's what it feels, that's what it feels like, embarking on deep professional learning of this kind. And what really good learning processes, what collaboration, what specialist support and evidence from research bring to that journey. They can slow the water down a bit, and they make the stepping stones a bit flatter and nicer to walk on, and the collaboration with someone else as your handrail. Keep those images in your head. That's what we need. When we're trying to turn our day-to-day professional lives into professional learning experiences and using research to do that, we're looking for the things that make that icy mountain feel us and feel more like that. And each of us as professionals can put those things around us to do that. So, when it's embedded, case study in school, to Laurie's example, sorry I wasn't quite as far as I thought. So here's a school that's really struggling to learn to systematise this. Kenote school, second biggest school in the country, staff of 300. The deputy head is the continuing professional development and learning leader, that's her title. And she leads a professional learning programme for all the staff. And they've organised the school so there are periods 2:30 to 4:30 every Wednesday, other than the beginning and end of terms. And 3 full-day professional learning sessions. Now, some of the professional learning that's going on in there would be what you might recognise as departmental meetings, but they're now cast firmly as professional learning sessions, even when it's a department working together, and all admin is mainly in emails and not managed through those meetings. But what's going on through those is inquiry, R&D groups, coaching, and degree and M-level study, and the teachers have contributed an hour, and the school has contributed an hour to that, to make that happen. The professional learning process has interactive whole school sessions sometimes, but departmental groups and special interest groups too. There's a lot of different things going on, so the teachers have got quite a lot of choice about where they go and what kind of activities they join in during those occasions. All of the learning is underpinned by co-coaching. All of the teachers have a partner with whom they co-coach. They don't have to be working on the same thing, they just have to commit to talking to each other about how their learning is moving forward and how it's affecting learning. And they've got tools that support all that. They also use video evidence. And the reason why they use video evidence, I'm going to show you in a minute, is really quite powerful. And there's a route map that underpins this. So we've developed for them, their 4 priorities are developing effective questions, developing active learning, raising achievement through assessment for learning and using its full potential, and securing effective levels of challenge. And we've organised summaries of the research in progressively more complex forms, including micro-inquiry tools for the teachers to work through during those Wednesday afternoons with their peer coaching. And there are videos of researchers, mini case studies like the Alf Coles one done by teachers, as well as large-scale reviews and context studies. So, all of that's going on. There was quite a lot of this investment, but it wasn't all making a difference. When we went in and did the scale analysis of the professional learning community, some of it just wasn't working, which is why we made the research with that. But another thing wasn't working, people weren't getting a chance to learn from looking. The school of bought ARIS, which is a commercial model of videoing in classroom, and people weren't using the video cameras. So the headset, I've got to learn to do performance review better. I'm not doing it well enough. I volunteer to video all my feedback sessions when I do performance review, and if the person I reviewed agrees to the video being shared, on Wednesday afternoon sessions, I will be available once a month to be coached by you on improving my skills in performance review feedback. Within 5 weeks, every one of the 50 licensed video cameras was being used and booked, and they bought another 50, so then I've got 100 video cameras because the head modelled being vulnerable on a sustained basis and being open to learning from people. I think there's quite a lot going on in the schools. Not perfect. They're trying to make it work just as well as the support staff, as the teachers. There are all kinds of things that they struggle with. but they are all struggling with it, and they're all up for it, and there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest this kind of professional learning feels like something that happens for teachers and for pupils in the same kind of way. So, I think the closing question really for the session is what might make a more coherent, sustained approach to making research-based professional learning work at every level look like in your context? You know, what is it that might happen or change from what we've been talking here? You were already doing that, Sharon, weren't you, earlier on? But no, just what is that question? Have a quick buzz, and then we'll wrap up. It might be 2 minutes for a story, it might not, but just have a quick buzz about that.